Welcome to the 98th Fireside Chat. We are going live currently on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, X. I'm just going to call it Twitter, honestly, and Instagram. So as we're getting those set up and going live, I just want to let everybody know that I'm at a coffee shop right now. So if you hear somebody yelling orders or if you hear planes buzzing by and some kind of like coffee shop music and like some jams in the back, that's why. Just got the confirmation that we are live on Instagram, so now we're just waiting for Dr. Sandra. Let's see. I think she is in the back room right now, and I have to give her access. Uh, all right, so we're currently in the process of putting Dr. Sandra up front. Oh, there we go.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. I think this is actually my first time meeting you virtually.
I think
And
so.
yeah, because I know Jason did a Fiery Embers with you and he did your interview.
Yeah.
It was actually just really funny. Jason is handling the setup of like the live and everything right now. And I was like,
Hmm.
Dr. Sanders in the back room, but I can't let her in. You have to do it. I'm like texting. It was just, I was just telling people I'm at like a coffee shop and everything right now. So um,
Yeah.
just fireside chat shenanigans, but just want to let everybody know that we are live on all the platforms and excited to have you, Dr. Sandra, on the show. And this is our 98th episode, so we're like two off from our 100th episode here.
That's amazing. You guys are doing fantastic, and it's such a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you having you on the show. And leading up to it, I was rereading your story again, and it's just really cool story. And I've got so many questions. Most of this is just going to flow like a fun conversation, like the Fiery Embers. And
Hmm.
I think that there's just a lot of cool things to talk about that we can't really encompass in one live. So we're just going to have some fun.
Yeah, sounds good.
So one of the things I like to do is I think that people in general are very bad at giving themselves hype up intros because we're all pretty humble at what we do, and it's really hard to do it. So I've got a bit of a hype up intro for you. Um,
Thank you.
normally it would be like a ta-da, I like bring you in from the back room and everything, but Jason had to
Mhm.
do it this time, so you just have to sit there awkwardly while I do this.
Oh no, it's totally fine. This is great.
So, uh, some of the stuff that I've read about you is that you were a five-time NCAA All-American swimmer. You've been you've been swimming since you were 3 years old. Uh, during the course of your collegiate career, you navigated this whole journey of swimming, not just your
Mhm.
collegiate career, but like from the age of 3 to middle school through college of like finding joy in swimming, doing it because of like safety, parental decisions, navigating burnouts and
Mhm.
injury. And this eventually led you to this identity of the swimmer doc, where you want to pass on the teachings that you gained from your experiences to help others. Uh,
Absolutely.
and so that's kind of the gist of what we're going to talk about today, folks. And so I think I'm going to jump right into saying, welcome to the show, Dr. Harrell.
Thank you. So nice to be here. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, one of the things I do want to ask you is I don't know if Jason ever asked you the icebreaker question because it's like a fiery embers. We ask it on all of our normal fireside chats. I don't know if we do it on the fiery embers, but this will decide if I had to drag Jason back here and to do the interview uh, or I do your interview. So, are you ready for the icebreaker question?
Sure. Yeah.
Pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
Mm, that's funny. My hesitation would already probably tell you, give you a hint. As an adult, nay. As a child, yay.
Are
Tastes
you
good
are
like
you
cake.
are you originally from the East Coast?
No, no, I am from West Coast.
Oh my God, I don't buy it. It's so
Why?
wild. Every single,
Why do East Coast people like pineapple on their pizza?
at least every single person I've talked to on the chat, it's like, do you like pineapple on your pizza? Every time they say nay, they're like, yeah, but I'm from Delaware. I'm from New York City. And then the West Coast people are always like, or the pineapple on pizza people are like, I'm from Hawaii. I'm from California.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny. No, I used to like it a lot more. Now I kind of like my savory and my sweet to be kind of separate. So
Definitely. So one of the things I really wanted to dive into was just talking about like, uh, so you've done an interview with Jason, and there's a story on the platform about you, which I'll share the link to that again. It's a really cool story. I want to dive into like starting at the age of 3. Like you had this like fear of water, and you jumped into the pool when you were 3, and I just want to kind of like start there and like talk a bit about like your swimming journey.
sure, absolutely. So at 3, it was mainly, parents forcing me into the sport, less of a sport, more for water safety, life-saving skills. Was never a fan of swimming at that age, but I got into it because, my brother, who's 6 years older than me, was underwater. And so, I always wanted to be like my older brother, do whatever he did. And so that's kind of what got me started. He was underwater. So I just went head first in to see what was going on. I don't know if I choked on water. I don't know if I knew to hold my breath at that point. I was just told that, like, I just went head first after my parents, like, I was at the YMCA trying to learn, and it was an indoor pool, so a lot of echo. So apparently, all the lifeguards knew me because I was that one kid that would scream her head off at knee deep water right by the stairs with the rail. So that was me. That was that kid growing up with swimming. So that's kind of my first exposure to being in the water, and then from there, I it was more, my mom wanting me to be a part of it because my brother was also on the swim team. So, I naturally like, well, I kind of like it, I guess. I like it because he's doing it. So I just want to do whatever he's doing. Um, and so I joined a competitive swim team at the age of 5 and was competitive through my, childhood years. And then, I think halfway through, I think elementary school, I just was I wasn't really into it. I was more so I just want to hang out with my brother, but at such a big age gap, we were just swimming at different levels. It just wasn't fun for me to be swimming laps and doing like practices and such at a young age. So I actually really hated swimming. During my early years. And eventually, I convinced my mom that I'd be able to quit for a couple of years. And then came like junior high, middle school. Everybody's just trying to find their identity, find what they're good at. Um, and so I hopped right back into swimming because that was really the one sport that I knew, or at least I was familiar with. I didn't have to, learn a new skill or a new sport, new rules. I already kind of knew it off off like the back of my head. And so I went back into swimming, and this time I fell in love with it because it was more of the competitive nature in me now that, I wanted to excel in something, and that kind of became my outlet for, competition, and just wanting to be good at something, and it came very natural at that point.
So tell me a bit. So now that you've talked about competition and kind of that being the driving force behind you getting back into swimming after navigating burnout for the first time, talk a
Hmm.
bit, uh, dive into your collegiate career
Oh,
and talk a bit about that. One of the things that stood out to me was like factors of guidance, the level of competition, and also just like navigating injury.
Yeah, so going into my freshman year in college, I was already experiencing injury from, improper recovery strategies, just overtraining. Mentally, I didn't feel the burnout, but physically, my body was starting to alert me that, hey, I'm starting to get pain here and there, in my back and in my shoulder. Um, but, just swimming back then was just very different. I think sports in general back then were just very different. There's a lot less guidance in like the rehab and recovery, sectors of the sport than there is in terms of performance. So performance, there's always a lot of, resources in terms of coaching, but very little coaching and guidance when it came to rehab, injury prevention, proper recovery, making sure you're not overtraining. So yes, so going back, going into college, I was already dealing with some sort of like upper back or shoulder issue. Um, and I was training, I came from a smaller club team. However, I did train club and high school in order to hit my volume to try to be competitive when I entered college. So, to compensate for being part of a smaller club team, I would double my workouts every day, and maybe even swim like 3 times a day just to try to, like be competitive and not not be too much of a rookie my freshman year. So because of that, because of the overtraining, and improper training, that's what kind of led to my injuries. And so going into college, it was very eye opening because it was the first time I was a part of a very large and competitive team. Um, and so I was just not used to the volume, of training all of a sudden and at the intensity that I was expected to train at. So that further, you know, propagated my injuries, it made them worse. And it was also my first exposure, first real exposure to strength and conditioning too. Um, Prior to college, all of my training really was in the pool. We did do some dry land exercises, but they were all body weight, maybe an occasional med ball or slam ball, for equipment. Um, but we lacked strength training. And now to, 10 years forward, I'm recognizing that, you know, there were, that was probably the start of the issue. It was the lack of proper supplemental training, and that's kind of where I am here in terms of like my injury prevention and my view and my lens of swimming. It's that, the injury prevention realm of things. But yeah, going into college, that was the first time I had any proper strength and conditioning. So it was great. My body finally felt like it was training properly. However, at the same time, I was already dealing with a chronic injury. So it was almost like it was a little too late to try to bandage things up. Um, and so, just navigating that in college was a little tough because in college, it was still the mentality of no pain, no gain. I think there still is some of that mentality today, but I think in terms of coaching and training cycles and structures, we're smarter. You know, we're not hard headed to only have that mentality. Now we're, more interested in, and curious and like, okay, well, what can we change what can we modify to accommodate injury or prevent injury from happening? Um, so yeah, that's kind of where, college swimming was great. However, the strength training aspect, if I had it sooner, I probably wouldn't have been injured, but because I was already injured, I wasn't getting the strength training that would have helped me specifically to accommodate my injuries. So, yeah.
So that's I'm really glad that you brought up like the way training was be done, and you got into the specifics of like what existed back then and what didn't, because that was definitely one of my questions of like how the sport has changed over the years and how coaching has changed over the years. And so one thing I do want to ask you is like this eventually led you down the path of like becoming the swimmer doc
Mhm.
and becoming a coach. And I wanted to ask you, was that like more of a gradual process of like figuring out that's what you wanted to do, or was there kind of a epiphany that you had, or several epiphanies that you had, that you wanted to take this knowledge that you built from your experience and you wanted to help others?
Yeah, it was more of a gradual process. Definitely more of, having multiple epiphanies. It wasn't even just one epiphany. Um, I went into physical therapy and rehab because it was more of like a personal thing. I had dealt with so many injuries in college and in high school that, I just felt like if I wanted to remain active and athletic, which, you know, I've just always been active, so that was kind of a no-brainer. So if I wanted to continue to stay active and be athletic and surf and run and lift and do all these fun things, then I better learn how to take care of myself, rather than fall back on, a healthcare system with, you know, very little guidance and direction from my providers. Um, and so it was more of like the autonomy that I was seeking, and, the need to like treat myself and make sure like, hey, I'm at the very least, my first and foremost goal was to like rehab myself so that I can continue doing the things I loved and not have to worry about messing and dealing with pain for the rest of my life, just so that I can, stay active. Um, so it was more of like, a selfish reason of like me wanting to go into physical therapy. Going into school, being from such an athletic background, it was very natural for me to want to go into sports medicine and sports rehabilitation, just because, I was like, well, I'm going into this because, I want to help people like me. But, down the line, it was just in terms of the structure and the different settings of being in a sports and ortho background, I recognize that, hey, if I worked in a clinic, um, it wasn't necessary that I would work with athletes all the time. It's just, oftentimes these clinics will say like, oh, it's a sports clinic, but they see a lot more, orthopedics, just regular orthopedics. They see geriatrics, they see just workers comp, and there's nothing wrong with any of that, but it made me realize that like it wasn't as transparent as what they said it would be. So I wanted something different. So I ended up going through into like the hospital system and working in like a skilled nursing facility instead, and helping and working with the geriatric population a lot for some time. And then over the years, I felt like I was losing a big part of myself with like each month and year that passed working in, a hospital setting or an acute care setting. And, I was feeling the burnout in terms of my career, and I was losing interest in wanting to be active and just being happy. The, my career was taking a lot out of me, mentally and emotionally. Um, and so I thought that, I needed to switch up the pace and do something different because, I went into this profession because I wanted to help people, along with like myself, but I wanted to like share my knowledge, and I have such a dense background in athletics that I wanted to put it to use somewhere. So I took some time away from being in the traditional healthcare setting. Um, and then I kind of, was starting to get back in the water from time to time. I would hop back in the pool and just swim. I'd swam with, several masters teams, and I really liked it, but It just still wasn't, nothing was clicking for me yet. And then one day, I was just kind of brainstorming with my husband, and we were just talking about, like, how about I mesh the things I'm very passionate about into one thing? Like, how can I mesh everything I enjoy into one thing? And that was me realizing that, like, hey, I still am very passionate about swimming. Competitively, I love the sport. I love the skill development, just how intricate it is. Um, and there's just so much about swimming. And I think just the in terms of like kinesiology, just understanding like how the body works and body movement, and how it's like a small thing in your body can affect something very large. And I feel like with swimming it's very apparent with that, in terms of like fixing technique, and fine tuning aspects of your technique will greatly impact your overall speed. And so I you know have a very strong background in like getting into the nitty gritty of like technique. And so combining that, and combining injury prevention and rehab and strength training, just it kind of became my practice. It kind of became like my career and my profession, where I'm molding all these pieces together. And yeah, they're all kind of interconnected, with injuries. It's usually not just one thing. Injury and, pain is, multifactorial. And so if, I've treated so many athletes down the line that, they come to me, especially swimmers, they come to me and they're like, I have shoulder pain. And I'm like, okay, well, that tells me very little. There are multiple reasons why you have shoulder pain. It can be something that's insidious, that is, originating from your technique, or it could be, like something more traumatic, where you had something like hit you, or you ran into something. And so it was just, I started to play detective and trying to figure out and piece out injuries for this particular group, for like for aquatic athletes. And I started to realize that, hey, technique is just as important as strength training. And that was something that I think most people still don't really realize in the swimming world. People think that, in order to be a fast swimmer, let alone injury prevention. So we're not even touching base on like the injury, just on the performance side, not even rehab, but performance side, people think, you know, it's proper programming in the pool in terms of volume and intensities, and specificity in your training. And I agree with all of that. It's really important. However, strength training also plays a part in not only supplementing pool training or open water training, but also, injury prevention. And then so I started to dive into that, and then realizing that, like, hey, you can have a stellar strength program and swim program and a swim coach, right? And you can do all of that correctly, but you can still get injured. You can have proper programming where you're programming recovery into it. However, you can still get injured. So I'm like, so what I am trying to figure out now, or what I have realized, is that there are multiple pieces to injury prevention and to performance. You've got to have the proper technique. You have to have proper programming and proper swim coaching, and you also have to have proper strength programming, and proper strength, but that also includes prehab. So things with like mobility, things in terms of prehab, it would be like mobility, strength, as well as things that would affect your recovery, like nutrition and hydration and sleep would also affect your performance. So that's my practice has now become very holistic, and I, instead of just looking at the injury itself and just trying to, you know, fix a shoulder pain, now I'm looking at their lifestyle. I'm looking at their training cycles and training periodization. I'm looking at their technique to find the root of the problem. And I'm also, addressing, you know, things that are outside of their sport, like hydration and nutrition and whatnot. And that those all those factors play, a role into pain and pain perception, as well as injury and injury development and recovery. So
That makes sense. And there are a lot of things that I want to dive into there, but specifically strength training, because Jason and I are both ultra runners. We're big proponents of strength training for injury prevention. And I just think that it is a concept among endurance athletes and athletes that is a universal concept. And I
mhm.
do think that uh, it needs to be emphasized more. So, talk a little bit more about the importance of strength training and how that made a difference for you and how that's made a difference for your clients.
Absolutely. So, well, with strength training, I say that it's a supplement, to pull training, but that is me not even giving it proper credit, because I think to become not only a good athlete, but also an athlete with longevity in their career, you need strength training. It's equally as important. Sometimes, depending on the type of athlete you are, if you are, say, like a sprinter versus an endurance athlete, strength training may actually play an even bigger role than pool training, or swim specific training. So yeah, I think and it's so important, to not have, cookie cutter programs, I know a lot of people who don't have proper strength training. They do it, which is great. It's always a good start. And you know, it always surprises me, but pleases me at the same time, that, like, hey, when I ask them, are you working out in the gym? And they're like, yeah, I am. And I'm like, okay, well, are you swimming because you have competitive goals, like you want to race in the Ironman, or you want to do an Ironman, or are you trying to do like a 4K in open water, or are you like a competitive pool swimmer and looking to go to the Olympics this year, and whenever they say, yeah, like I have these large competitive goals, but I just do my own strength training. And, how can you expect how can you expect to be competitive at such a high level without like a proper swim coach, right? Without proper swim programming. And the same would go for strength training, right? Like, how can you expect to be able to do that on your own when you don't have the proper coaching behind that, And I think that is usually, like the first conversation that I have, like, are you happy with your strength programming, and are you seeing results? And if you're not seeing results and you don't have proper strength training, well, now there's a gap in your training that we can fill, and so going through there, just making sure you have the proper strength coach for the sport too. Being sport specific does help. I would rather have, my athletes train, or I would rather train with a strength coach who has a swimming background, who understands the intricacies of the sport, the different techniques, the different phases of a stroke, and how to manipulate walls, and turns and finishes and starts and all that stuff, knowing when to be explosive and you know, when to maybe kick in the endurance in terms of strength programming and coaching. So, it always helps to have, like, a strength coach who knows the sport through and through, as opposed to a strength coach that, does everything. You can't be a jack of, if you're going to be a jack of all trades, you're going to be a master of none, right? So that's kind of what I would tell my athletes, like, hey, that's great that you have a strength coach. Now, do you have goals of swimming collegiately, or do you have goals of competing in an Ironman? Because if you do, I hope your strength coach knows how to program you for your sport, and not even your sport, but for your specific event too. You know, so that's kind of the gist of strength training. Did I answer all of your questions? Are there more about strength training?
Actually, I think it feeds into my next question, which, you were talking about like the right type of programming, which makes a lot of sense because even in running, there's a lot of stuff you could do versus like you should be doing a lot of unilateral stuff. Um, and it's just like there's so much specificity involved. So it kind of feeds into the topic of like specificity and intentionality. And I think this is another universal thing in sports too, where people think that you have to do a lot of volume, just like stuff a lot of volume to just become like insanely competitive. And maybe in the case of running, it's like you have to just run fast all the time, I think is a common misconception, one that I fell prey to. Um, and so one of the things that I've seen you emphasize a lot is like specificity in training and intentionality in everything that you do. So talk about the importance of specificity, not only in swimming and intentionality, but also endurance sports.
So are you saying in terms of like strength training or just training in general in terms of
I think
specificity?
I think training in general.
Okay, yeah. So yes, so it's so important to be specific with what you're training, right? Because it all comes back down to, you either use it or you lose it, so most people tend to have both, fast twitch and slow twitch muscles. That's just a very like general way to describe, that I feel like that's very commonly understood, that they're athletes that are more fast twitch, they tend to be your sprinters and your power athletes. And there are people who have more like slow twitch, which would be, longer endurances. They last a lot longer. And those are your your endurance athletes, your ultra runners, ultra endurance
Hey,
runners.
it's me, all the slow twitch fibers.
I was the opposite. I was fast twitch and I had terrible endurance no matter how much I trained. But so, most people kind of they have a like a mixed smattering of two. You have to have some fast twitch and you're gonna have to have some slow twitch. It's just how much are you, maybe genetically predisposed to, and then how much are you training in that area too, right? So if somebody who has, a lot of fast twitch muscles, they're naturally a sprinter, but coach didn't know that, they weren't aware of that, they were just the coach and the athlete just always was training in endurance, then they're going to start to develop more slow twitch muscles, or those are going to get, that it's going to get stronger, so they can work themselves into it. They can train themselves to become endurance athletes, with, even though they are maybe predominantly, or naturally a sprinter, they can train themselves to become an endurance athlete. And the same can be said likewise. If somebody had a lot of slow twitch, and they're naturally an endurance athlete, they have great stamina, but not a lot of sprint and power in them, then, if they were to train as a sprinter, they can also become a sprinter too. Um, However, it's finding that sweet spot in terms of like being as competitive as you possibly can, right? So it's like, oh, realizing that naturally you're a sprinter, and so you're going to be specific in your training to train as a sprinter, and that's when you see these athletes blossom. They kind of found like the sweet spot in like what they're good at, what their bodies are capable of too. And so that also goes into like training in terms of specificity. Say for example, as like a sprinter, you would want to do more plyometrics, more power, more hypertrophy and strength programming in terms of strength training. And with swim programming, you want to do shorter, higher intensity sets with lots of rest, and depending on your stroke, you modify those parameters. For endurance athletes, you would want to program so that you're doing more muscular endurance based work. You're still doing plyometrics, you're still programming power plyometrics, like some hypertrophy, but you're probably going to be more endurance based in terms of your strength programming, right? Because yes, we still need all those other things because, at the beginning of a race, you're kind of sprinting to get going, and then you set into a rhythm, into a pace, right? And then you also want to kind of sprint at the end of your race to get to the finish line, or like maybe the like last third of your race you start to ramp up your pace a little bit so that you finish quicker, and your middle section might be like a little bit slower. So in terms of endurance athletes, power and sprint work is still important, but it's just varying how much of that training you're getting and when you're incorporating that type of training cycle into your periodization. So yeah.
It's very fascinating to me. It's very fascinating to me how many parameters you have to deal with as a coach. There could be like it could start with something as simple as like coming back full circle on the conversation, like you talking about like checking their lifestyle, their nutrition, their sleep habits, and also just like with any sport, like
Mm-hmm.
when a client comes to you, is your goal to like just finish a swim in a triathlon, finish an open water swim, or compete
Mm-hmm.
at a high level? And so I'm curious, like, as far as like the process you build up over the years, like, I'm sure it's like got its challenges and nobody's perfect with it and we're all figuring things out. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you communicate with your clients and what kind of process do you go through to like navigate and adjust all those parameters and factors?
Yeah, so right now I primarily coach remotely. So I'm all in app in my coaching. I coach both technique. I have an app for technique coaching where they're sending me videos of their swimming, and I break down and I analyze their technique with slow motion. I use a lot of kinematic and biomechanical feedback and analysis. Um, and I'll do like frame with voice commentary over it, and I break down their stroke frame by frame so that they see what I'm seeing in real time and I'm talking over it, and then I slow everything down and then I point out this is exactly the area that needs work. Like let's focus on one thing this week and let's work on, say, like your body position. Most swimmers have the tendency to look forward when they're swimming, especially open water swimmers. The tendency is to look up, and rightly so, you want to see where you're going. That's something that's very natural, right? Because you don't want to run into anybody. But that's actually the one thing you don't want to do is look forward, because that's going to, that just you looking forward, there's something called a head hip relationship. And so what goes up must come down. So if your head is going up, your hips are dropping down. And so now you're
Uh,
swimming at an incline, right? You're swimming uphill. And what's happening is that if you're swimming uphill, you are becoming a wall, all right? And water is hitting you at every point in your body. And you're essentially pressing the gas pedal and pulling on the e-brakes at the same time. So how fast are you going to go if you're going to be gassing, like flooring it, and hanging on that e-brake? It's going to be limited. Also, injuries are going to come if you're gassing it and trying to, also do things improperly. Like your car is going to break. Something's going to go wrong with your car if you're yanking on that e-brake and gassing it at the same time. So the same analogy applies for the human body, right? So something as little as head position. If you just looked down and fixed that head position, now what goes up, what comes down, the other thing must go up. Your head is now coming down, your hips are going up now. All right, so now you're swimming at a more horizontal plane. So now water is only hitting at this one area. Okay, you are in a more streamlined position. Water is just hitting the top of your head, maybe your shoulders, and you're rotating well. And so now water is just flowing underneath you. You have now released the e-brake and you're just pressing the gas pedal. So, um, so I do a lot of extensive technique coaching, and you know, a lot of the times, like I can help a lot of my swimmers just immediately swim faster without working any harder. If anything, they work a lot less hard, because now they're more efficient in the water. They're not pulling on the e-brakes on themselves every time. So I do a lot of that through my app. I also have another app where I do specifically strength rehab and swim programming. So a lot of strength training in that app. And there, it's a lot of communication, a lot of back and forth. So, I tell my athletes, oftentimes, they under communicate because they are embarrassed of asking too many questions, or they think it's a dumb question, or they don't want to bother me, and it's like, well, my coaching is only going to be as good as you allow me to be. So if you don't tell me that this workout or this new training cycle isn't working for you, like you're not hitting the intervals, you can't do the reps that I request of you, you're not doing the exercises properly, or you're doing it improperly, like you're not lifting properly, but you're not sending me form checks, videos for me to offer form checks for, then I'm not going to know when you're going to get injured. It's not, this program is not fit for you if you don't communicate with me. So I always harp on my clients and my athletes, like, hey, I'd rather you over communicate and over share than to under communicate, because you and I are doing each other a disservice. You're not training at the level that you can train at, and I'm not coaching you at the level that you can train at. So it kind of goes both ways. So, in my app, it's just, I tell my athletes, like, hey, you can text me 24/7. I'll always respond to you. Um, and, just, I would rather you just text me everything and comment on every aspect of the training. That way I can tailor each week until I know exactly what you need. So usually, like, my new clients, it's kind of like, we're learning to dance with each other for like the first few weeks, and then we get into a rhythm. And so it becomes a lot easier. I can anticipate what they need and what they're capable of doing. And they also understand, like, my coaching style as well. So yeah, that's kind of how I adapt and accommodate, the different the variations between athletes. Is just, I tell them, communicate with me as much as you want. You are able to text me directly. You have 24/7 access to me, and I will be there for you as much as you allow me to.
I, I'm glad you ended on that note of that you will be there as much as they allow you to, because I do think that that should be emphasized as well. One, I got to a point with ultra running where I realized that I needed to find a coach who had specificity in like the distance I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
And it has resulted in like a huge acceleration and improvements. And two, like, it's a very good point that like your coach is not a mind reader. You can only you can only do as much as you tell them. I over text my coach all the time about stuff,
Yeah.
like every specific detail, and I just think that it all comes full circle in this conversation about like no matter the sport you're in, but especially everything I've heard about swimming, like technique matters, intentionality matters, and
Hmm.
just communicating matters, because your coach, my coach can write me up a training plan and I can go like, oh boy, like this is going to be great. But that doesn't mean I'm going to hit every speed workout or I'm going to succeed at everything. And, or I might have a day where like, uh, I had stress at work, or like,
Life.
I have a niggle on my foot or something. Like, what should I do, coach? Like, but if you don't talk about it, then how's your coach going to know? They're just going to think you're doing all right. So,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The worst thing that can happen is that, you get injured and you're quiet about it, right? And you become disgruntled and angry and upset. And like that, all, like, your mental health all affects your physical performance as well, So it's just like making sure that you catch something and you program properly before, you know, injuries do happen. And injuries are going to happen from time to time. It's just the nature of being athletic. We're all going to run into something at some point. It's a matter of how you handle it and how you can program that into your training and your performance. Like, injuries aren't, it's not a death sentence. It's not career ending for the most part, just depending on your injury. But for the most part, it's not career ending. You can modify your training, you know. Um, and you'll see a lot of, and that's the thing too, you'll see a lot of, rehab coaches, or if you enter like the healthcare system and go into like the traditional healthcare route of getting like a physical therapist or seeing like an orthopedic surgeon and whatnot, with an injury, sometimes they'll tell you like, hey, you need to stop. You can't train right now. Um, and I think that's really hard for a lot of athletes. I think that's something that like, that might be something that isn't discussed a lot and is very detrimental, not only physically in terms of their conditioning, but like their mental health. They're used to training like 20 hours a week, and you tell these competitive high level athletes that like, hey, you need to take a break. And if it's like 2 weeks, it's tough, when it's not programmed properly for you to have a rest, to have like rest and whatnot, especially in the middle of a season, especially if preparing for like a big race. It's tough. And so it's finding a way to be able to allow athletes to do their sport while also recovering with an injury, right? It's modifying parameters. It all comes down to being able to modify parameters, to being able to do what you can tolerate in a safe way that also promotes injury recovery and soft tissue healing, or bone tissue as well. So just depending on the injury, there are ways around it, but it's essentially meshing both healthcare and performance into one, right? Finding that sweet spot.
Absolutely. Uh, Dr. Sandra, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. Before we jump onto the rapid fire food section, I wanted you to let people know where they can find you, and where they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. I am very active there. You can also find me on my website. My website is www.theswimmersdoc.com. Um, and my Instagram handle is theswimmersdoc. And so, yeah,
Awesome.
shoot me an email. You can send me a contact form through my website, or you can just DM me through Instagram. I will get to it. It's all like I run all of that myself, so I will see your message, regardless.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So,
Yeah.
are you ready for our rapid fire food section?
Yes.
All right, we're gonna have some fun. French fries or onion rings?
Ooh. Probably onion rings. Well, I always overthink it when it comes down to food. On a day-to-day basis, probably French fries. Um, but if haven't had it in a while, onion rings definitely.
Any specific kind of French fries?
I like the string, like the stringy
Oh yeah.
ones. I don't like crinkle cut or like waffle, fries, or like the wedges. I'm not into that at all. Like, like the McDonald's ones, like super
Oh yeah. Like
saltier than
traditional
butter.
almost.
Yeah.
Traditional fries almost. Uh, do you have any dipping sauce with your fries?
I mean, I'll eat anything, any dipping sauce. Yeah. I don't discriminate when it comes to sauce at all.
I love it. That's the right answer. Um, Popcorn or pretzels?
Mm. To be honest, I'm not a huge fan of either, but if I had to pick, probably popcorn. It's not as dry. And I feel like that you can add different seasons to that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Uh, Pancakes or waffles?
Waffles. I don't like pancakes. The My husband's a big pancake eater, and it's just sometimes it seems a little dry. So waffles, just that added like crunch. It's too good to say no.
That's true. Waffles do have that extra crunch. I can't disagree with that. So there's two food trucks, a taco truck and a burger truck. Which one do you pick?
Probably a burger truck. Yeah.
What kind of, what do you put on your burger?
Um, I I like my burgers medium to medium rare, and just anything. I lettuce, tomatoes. I love banana peppers on them. It's so good. Um, and, like relish, mustard, ketchup, mayo, everything.
Would you put pineapple on your burger?
Yeah, I'll try it. I'm always open to trying new things. So yes, I would.
Man, I'm 0 for 2 on that. Every single time there's a little bit of hesitancy, I'm like, oh, okay. Uh, so peanut butter. Are you a fan of peanut butter or any nut butter?
I do love peanut butter. Peanut butter is
Cr-
good.
Crunchy or creamy?
I like both. I think I tend to go with creamy just because it's easier to spread. So for me, it's like, okay, how can I make food as quickly as possible? So just crunchy, it just takes too long, and sometimes it rips the bread. And so now, I have a hole in my bread, and keep it keep it creamy.
The specificity carries over everywhere, folks, but
Yeah.
especially with food. So I got a question for you about sandwiches. Do you do a square cut or an angle cut?
Um,
Triangular cut or square cut?
I don't cut it at all. I just eat it straight on. What I like to do is I like to eat the crust around it first, and then I work on the middle where like the bread is
Ah,
soft. I've always hated the crust, but I was always like forced to eat everything as a kid. So now it's ingrained to me to not waste food. So I eat
mhm.
the stuff I hate first. And so I tend to eat around, and then I have like the best for last. So if I cut the bread, I'm going to have to like eat the crust on both ends and then enjoy the middle. So I might as well just keep it together and just
Mm.
finish the crust all at once.
Oh, you might be the first person who's mentioned eating the crust and then eating the sandwich. I know there's somebody who mentioned like eating the sandwich like just like down the middle with like one big bite. That was like shocking to me. I actually think yours is a bit more tame. um, so if you're having PB and J, do you put the PB and J on one slice of the bread, or do you put PB on one and J on one?
I'll put peanut butter on both slices of the bread and then jelly on just one because I like peanut butter more than I like jelly.
Oh, okay. First time I think I've heard that too. That's really
Really?
smart, actually.
And so it's like bread, peanut butter, jelly, peanut butter, bread.
You have to try this too, going back to burgers. But a couple people have mentioned putting peanut butter on their burgers, in their burgers. Uh,
Interesting. I will try
It,
that.
it sounds very intriguing. Are you a cake person or a pie person?
I like pie more, but I even with the pie, I just like the crust.
Uh, what kind of pie?
mm, I like um is it key lime pie? Yeah, I like lemon and like lime desserts. So like anything with like a lemony zest, I like that.
Okay.
I don't know that I don't know if I've had lemon meringue pie, but I probably would like that too. But I like key lime pie a lot.
I'm definitely a crust person myself. Like, I love a good crust on a pie. It's just something about it.
Yep, it just tastes so good.
So good. And last question. What's your favorite candy?
Probably like chocolate candy or like hard candy.
Do you have a favorite like chocolate candy or do you like chocolate bars?
I like Twix for like a like
Okay.
candy or chocolate bar. That's probably my favorite. My second would probably be Reese's peanut butter cups. Yeah.
Ooh, I love Reese's.
Yeah, those would probably be my favorite too.
I assume with Reese's you're going traditional and not the new caramel flavor they came up with.
No,
Good,
just the
good.
peanut butter.
There's only one right answer for Reese's peanut butter
Yeah.
cups.
Get the king size ones.
That is more absolutely the correct answer. Dr. Sandra, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It was such a fun conversation, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you so much. You too. This is such a pleasure.